Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining again, guys. We have another promotion with Dan Clark of Dan Clark Audio and Schiit Audio with Jason Stoddard. Guys, take it away. Tell us what we got.
Oh boy, Dan, people are going to start saying, hey, how come they're doing all these things together? I mean, I don't know what to tell them other than, hey, we both have good products. We make stuff in California. I mean, it kind of makes sense, right?
Yeah, well, actually, when I got in the industry, you were the first vendor that I started talking to.
Mm.
So I've actually known you longer in the headphone business than anyone else as well. So it's just kind of always been fun doing stuff with you since day one.
Yeah, and we like your products. In fact, I mean, right here we've got, I don't think it's an RT, but it's the right color anyway. So um, I have to trust the guys in Valencia. That it's like I'm in Texas right now, so I'm kind of away from civilization. I don't know. So,
Yeah, or as Bugs Bunny says, civilization.
yes,
Yeah, well, I guess at least the temperature's below 196 degrees ambient for you guys now.
yeah, it's the weather's great right now, and yeah, and the mosquitoes haven't come out yet from the latest rains, so it's fantastic.
Yeah, enjoy your 4 weeks of perfect fall weather before it then gets freezing cold. And
Yeah, and then back to summer. So, yeah, it's okay though. But it is funny. I know that people will say that this is another thing we're doing, and it's like, but it's really different. The first one was kind of like, it's 1250. It's a decent chunk of money. This one is kind of like, if you're wandering around looking for something under $1,000, now like for 679, you're done.
yep.
You got a really good DAC amp and you got a really good set of headphones, and kind of cut to the chase. We're done here. That's how I see it anyway.
Gee, you're making me think I should pull down a single malt.
Well, it is four here, so it's close enough to five, right?
Yeah, we're still in the. It's 2 o'clock in San Diego, so not quite time to pour one. Yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, well, I've always felt like it's really nice. We get so many customers who, especially at the entry level, their first question is, what do we pair this with? How do we make a system? Oh, I didn't realize this would all be so expensive to put together. And a lot of times people for us who are shopping for our entry level products are new to the headphone community, or they are experienced headphone users who are either looking for gifts for kids or second system for the office, et cetera. And having something turnkey and bundled is, it just seems like a natural and obvious thing, especially for the entry level for that reason.
Yeah, and also it is funny though, because one of the reasons we recommend your stuff is a lot of people, especially these days, are like, oh, full size headphones. I don't know about that. Are they comfortable? Are they heavy? Are they hot? And it's like, if you want ergonomics, pick up basically anything from DCA. It's going to have state of the art, ergonomics. It's comfortable. They fold up. They go with you. There's a lot of things you can say about them, but the main thing is they're comfortable, and they're light, and you can't say that like for everything. So just, yeah, and I can
And the
name some
Aeon
other names,
RTs
but I won't. Hmm?
The Aeon RTs are also bulletproof. That's just an incredibly reliable headphone platform. They've been around for a few years. We make a ton of them, and they just don't come home.
Yeah, that sounds like Asgard in the same way. Asgard 3 has been around for a few years. So, of course, now everyone's saying, what about Asgard versus this? You haven't updated it for a while. And it's like, we haven't needed to. I mean, they don't break. They actually plug directly into the wall. There's no wall wart, to be dealing with. It has a DAC card in it, with USB-C in. So you plug it into your source, and that's about that. And it's a nice very pleasant, slightly warm sounding headphone amp that will drive pretty much anything. So
Yeah, you
we
can.
haven't
It's got
had.
so much power. You can use it for drive an electric chainsaw.
Oh, hilariously, at the recent Can Jam, there was a pair of two ohm prototype headphones that were sitting on the table with our stuff. And I'm like, why did you bring that? And they're like, well, why? I'm like, they're 2 ohms. They won't run on any of our stuff. And they're like, we've been running it on the whole rack, everything, no problem at all. I'm like, okay. If the magic smoke comes out, then, except what would happen is it would just go into current protection and it would click on and off. But it was actually funny. So I just said, go ahead, keep using them. If people want to listen to them, have fun with that.
Put it into bridge mode and use 1 amp for each channel, and
We didn't even need to do that. I mean, they're running off of Magni, they're running off of Asgard, they're running off a bunch of stuff. I'm like, okay, that's fine. I guess I wasted all that time doing the high current amps.
the one, yeah, or the 1 ohm special amp you did once.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That
yeah. It's
was,
it you know it, the Aeon RT is it's a little bit of an easier or a harder load to drive because it is 12 ohms. It does enjoy the fact that like everything in your product line is designed to be able to drive down to that level. You just don't run out of steam, and that's great. It's like we still run across the occasional amp vendor that seems to think that the ancient specification of 150 ohm output impedance on your headphone amps is still a thing. And so like I once had a vendor send me a couple of amplifiers to use at a trade show. I'm like, I can't get over like 75 dB before these are distorting. What's going on? And then I hooked it up and I'm like, oh, it's like 150 ohm output impedance. 90% of the power is dissipating in the output stage.
yeah. And also on the same note, and pretty much invariably when we get someone new who's doing a sound check or listen testing on our stuff, they'll hook up a Valhalla 2 to Aeons and go, this I'm like, right, it will not work. A tube output amp without a transformer, you have zero chance of running these. Use anything. Use an Asgard. Asgard's fine. You could use anything else, but just don't use that one. But it's funny. I know you wanted to talk about voicing, and we're kind of we're getting into the outskirts of that, kind of the periphery. I think a lot of people want to know, can it drive this? Will I have a problem? But then you get into what does it sound like?
Yeah.
Once you actually have gotten past the first issue of will it drive it? Will it get loud enough? Will it have a problem? Then how do you determine what it sounds like?
Yeah, well, voicing's always been a fun one. And, I do get asked, a lot by people, how do you do it? And it's, it's helpful to have target curves nowadays. There is at least, while I won't call it a standard in that sense, I mean, there is at least the Harman curve out there, which can sort of say, if you're in the general vicinity of this, you're beginning to have a profile that is going to be reasonably accurate. Because before that came out, there wasn't really a way to couple what we heard with what we measured in headphones in any kind of objective sense. And, the thing people don't understand about the Harman curve in general is that it's not like the curve. What it was derived as a statistical average of people's preferences. And there was a really large range of preferences and perceptions about what that curve should be that kind of went like plus or minus, I think it might be plus 8 dB in the bass and minus 4 or 5 dB in the bass. And then in the highs, it was like plus or minus 4. And, like half the people kind of wanted more bass than the target, and a quarter of the people wanted more treble, and, another quarter wanted more of each. And then there were a few people who wanted a little less of each. So, it's kind of like the Pirates Code, it's a bit more of a guideline.
Right.
So like the art and science of voicing headphones is to say, well, understanding that this is a statistical thing, how do you correlate that to what you want to actually produce? And like for me, voicing headphones is a little different, than I'm sure you go through for the process of voicing electronics. But because like we are substantially changing the sound, we're not like making tiny tweaks, um, and you know we're measuring differences that can be measured in 1 or more decibels, and
Right.
you know relative to how tight we keep our tolerances for production on especially on the driver's side before you factor in the pads, which are less accurate. you know, a dB or a dB and a half is a mile to me. Um,
Yeah.
you know, and it's so as you're voicing and you're working off, having a reference curve or a target curve, being able to kind of say, well, where do I take the pros and the cons and apply pressure to that curve to create a subjective experience, then kind of comes down to, well, what kind of subjective experience am I trying to create? Is it something where it's as acoustically neutral and linear as I can make it? Am I trying to deliberately impart a degree of fun to it? Um, and that's kind of the fun part of my job, and in a sense the hardest part, because there are so many judgment calls in how you do that, and just simply following the basic curve isn't really, it's like, yeah, you can do that a couple of times, but eventually all your products end up sounding the same.
Yeah.
And that means, statistically, that product that's exactly that may, in theory, applied be of interest to the most people because it's based on averages, but it isn't the be all and end all. And so, like a product like the RT has a little more bass than the Harman would call for, a little more sparkle up top, and so it gives it a more fun vibe to it.
Yeah.
Which is really enjoyable to me.
Yeah, I'm actually envious of you because you have things you can play with. A lot of people ask me, you know, how do you voice your electronics? And I kind of look at them and go, we don't, or we're very limited, it's oversimplified, but we have a lot less controls. There's a big misconception, which I found in a measurements presentation I did at Dallas Can Jam, that electronics are not flat. They're not, they actually have a frequency response. And I'm like, no, unless it's an equalizer or it's a RIAA preamp, or unless it's intended to be non-flat, you can take it as flat. So we don't get to play with the frequency response curve, really at all. But we do have some tools. And in fact, what's funny is we find most of it is applicable on the output stage. The output stage will get you the biggest change in overall sound. And that's why Asgard was our first continuity amp, which is where we're trying to kind of mimic Class A, when it goes out of Class A mode. And it was funny because an early version sounded very dry and kind of, just the facts, not a lot of fun. And I'm like, the continuity actually gives us a chance to curve the output stage transfer function. We can make it kind of curve up a bit like a tube. We can do a kind of a square law thing to it. And I'm like, well, we'll change the resistors. We'll make it a little more, fun, a little more square law, a little more like a tube. Sure enough, it actually did warm it up subjectively. It did change the sound. And it's really funny because people think, oh, we swap components on the front end to do that. It's like, no, it's mainly on the output stage. And like you said, it is very subtle. We're starting to do a lot more blind listening. And some people just don't hear it. Some people do hear it and think it's significant. And some people hear it and go, it's so tiny, I don't care. But we have less opportunities to voice. And more frustration. I've spent the last, couple months after the intro from Mjolnir 3 basically deconstructing it and trying to figure out why does it sound the way it sounds, so I can, use that in what we do. The sad, part is it's mainly that it's Class A, that's hard to replicate, and it's because of the chokes in it, so it's hard to replicate. So anything I do is going to be big, heavy, hot, painful, low power, and dumb, just like Mjolnir 3. So I was hoping to find the magic bullet so I could, take it down to something a little bit more accessible. It didn't work.
Yeah, well, I use the Mjolnir 3 a ton. It's sits right here next to me at my desk. Is one of my amps that I use in voicing. But I will say it's a great space heater as the weather gets colder.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. That's like, yeah, I
Not your most
wish,
friendly product there. Definitely not.
I wish there was an answer, because the first thing I did was went like kind of microscopic. I took the topology and put it in a tiny little amp to see if, that was it. It's like, no, that's not it. And then, I did a class A one. I'm like, oh, that's a lot closer. And then I put chokes in it. It's like, there we go. And I'm like, well, we're back. We're back to Mjolnir. So, it was futile, but it was, fun while we're doing it.
Yeah. So, when you are doing your fine tuning and you're trying to dial it in, how do you go about listening for it? What are you actually, what cues are you picking up and listening for? And, do you have like a couple of pieces of music in particular that you find are particularly helpful for that, or?
Yeah, I do. And I bounce around. I basically go in stages from, right now I'm listening to 4 or 5 tracks that are different than a year ago, and it's different from 2 years ago, and but I'll use them for a long time. And one of them I always come back to is "Don't Laugh." It's Wall of Voodoo, Back in Flesh, and the reason I use it,
Not laughing.
it's it's not the best recorded thing, but it's not horrible, and it's not, essentially it has enough acoustic stuff that you can get where it is. But the main thing is I'm real familiar with it. I'll play that and I'll go, okay, this is too bright, this is too edgy, this has got a problem. It's like, do you know what you're listening to? Because the blind listening stuff that we've done, where you can actually choose your music, if someone sets it up with something that's unfamiliar to you, I guarantee you I could put a Valley and a Magni, and on a quick listen, you will not hear any difference at all. And you'll go, wait, the switch is broken. It's like, no, the switch is not broken. It's just that you're unfamiliar with it. So
Yep.
The differences are fairly small, but they integrate over time. So what's small now could be much bigger later. It could be much more irritating, and I think that's why DACs are really hard to get a grip on what they sound like sometimes when you first start up, or if they're vastly different. Then the first thing you got to ask yourself is it actually broken? And that's where the measurement, yeah, do the measurement. Yeah, that's where the measurements come in handy. It's like, let's measure it, see if it is broken, because it might be.
Yeah, for us, we have, we always do that. But of course, it's purely analog devices with no feedback or, internal error correction, if you will. We have, bigger tolerances. So you get plus or minus a half a dB here, or plus or minus half a dB here. And when you add it up in tolerance stacking, it can become, a lot to deal with. And so, for us, both the art of voicing the headphones and for production is trying to keep that tolerance stack within control, because we don't have feedback mechanisms that can compensate for it. If you have plus or minus 10% in all your components, and then you stick 25 dB of feedback on it, that 10% stack kind of goes away. If we have that, you have 10% plus 10% plus 10%, and suddenly you have a 30% tolerance stack, and it's really rough. So for some of our products, we as when we're voicing it, we actually have to like profile and qualify and measure every single component. And then for production, we have to develop tolerance ranges and screening ranges for all of that. But it makes it a challenge when you're doing the initial voicing for prototyping, because you don't know what your target is with a given material or a given tension or a given volume, and so the iterations are very difficult. And then reproducing it in scale for production, it's manufacturing widgets that don't come out identically is very difficult. So while you may appreciate the fact that we have more levers to pull in terms of how it sounds, all of those levers work against you when you're trying to make everyone sound the same. So it's half of the work for us, if not 2/3 of the work for us in a product launch cycle, comes in the last month as manufacturing ramps up. And we're laser focused on, okay, we're not making 10 of them, we're making 500. How do we keep them all in alignment with those 10?
Yeah, I do not envy you that part of it. I mean, as you know, we had actually a brief kind of flirtation with doing our own turntable, and ran screaming from that, largely because of production tolerances. It's like that's the kind of thing we would have to do in house if we were going to do it. You can't just kind of order out the parts and expect they're going to be right. But yeah, there's tolerances in electronics, but it's a lot smaller. And if you're doing like a op amp design with 130 dB of feedback, hey, yeah, you know what? Those are going to be all the same. A low loop gain stuff that's discrete, kind of like us, that has 25 or 30 dB of feedback, will have some minor variations. And then you get into Skull, our new phono preamp, which is true no feedback and has up to 70 dB of gain. Those have to go through 100% testing because some of the JFETs actually don't have enough gain. And only at 70 dB, there's like about a 1 dB difference between channels. So those have to be sorted and fixed. And that gets into that, the scary thing of like, people don't like to hear that things might be a little different, but you got to trust, either your, manufacturing, process controls or ours, in our case, 100% testing to make sure. And I know that the Aeon RTs, I know that you match the drivers and all of that. Mm-hmm. So that, it's, what we're trying to do is ensure that everything is as consistent as possible. I'm sure you're doing exactly the same, but
yeah. Well, some of our products now we even screen and filter out ear pads, and are doing acoustic measurement to the ear pads and stuff. And we have pass-fail parameters for the pads, just like we do for the rest of the system, because the ear pads are, they're one of the things where tolerances are very comparatively loose. Like, an ear pad can have plus or minus a millimeter on stitching, and plus or minus a millimeter is like a mile to us when, our mechanical tolerances for everything else are a thousandth of an inch. And geometry has and pad volume around your ear has an effect on response and, standing wave formation and all sorts of things. So that's its own thing. But, I think the thing that I'm going to pull back a minute and go back to voicing, because you made a comment that is, you have like 4 tracks that you use, and you mentioned one of them. One of my favorite ones that I use, and it's my go-to track for the first listen on everything, and has been for 10 years, is Bird on a Wire by Madeline Peru.
Yep.
And it's just such a fantastic recording. And the piece of music is so beautiful that even though I have to listen to it like 20 times a day for 10 years, I can still enjoy the darn thing. It's like I can voice without going insane. It's like, it's not like being at a trade show and hearing Dark Side of the Moon come on again.
Oh boy. Yeah.
Or
that's one of the recordings you have to have. Yeah.
Yep. Well, that's one of the ones that we use streaming for because, everybody's got 72 different versions of Dark Side of the Moon, here.
Oh, I know. It's like, it's funny. It was
a resample of that,
Yeah, we actually got it on vinyl for, when we were showing recently, we brought a turntable and had it on vinyl. And of course, number 1 most requested. So there you go. We had some really wacky vinyl too, but people were a little weirded out by it. Oh well, what can you do?
Yeah. Well, so one of the things I love about Bird on the Wire as a track, I don't know if you know Blue Room by Peru, but it's just a wonderful album, and it's based on a lot of songs by Ray Charles from his Modern Sounds of Country Western. And it's not just a straight album of covers. There's some original work on it. There's some stuff by a couple of other, really cool artists or songwriters. Leonard Cohen, for instance, is in there, a couple of his tracks. But the album is just beautifully recorded. And the just in the opening sequence is one of the things that I always find most difficult with headphones is strings. And the recording is well done enough that if, as you're working on the voicing, you begin to hear like the layering or the rows within the strings, and you really get a sense of depth of field to the string section. And then on comes some beautifully recorded cymbals. And, that's the second thing that headphones have such a hard time getting right. It's all cymbal content is up in the zone where you have the maximum amount of standing waves, the maximum amount of jitter between drivers. And so for all those reasons, that is a great intro, because literally within the first 30 seconds, I can just go, nope, and take it off and go back to, working on it before you even get into the vocals or anything else, but then it comes on and it has some beautiful brush snares and, nicely recorded bass with some guitars and acoustic. And, for me, the first measure of voicing success has always got to be acoustic.
Mm-hmm.
If I can't get acoustics to sound right, nothing's going to sound right. And so at the end of the day, the acoustic kind of is the canary in the coal mine for me. And if once that track is beginning to sound right, then out comes like some Spangle. I really have a love for that. I Am You from Spangle is a great track for voicing because it's got tons of bass in it. It's got synths, percussion, multiple vocal tracks, flute, which is another hard instrument to get right. And, and so that's kind of like the layer 2 voicing track.
Yeah, it's funny because, you mentioned well-recorded and essentially folk or country western. It's actually interesting if you follow Stan Ridgway's career, from Wall of Voodoo forward. Some of his very latest stuff, 2010, 2013, is very well recorded. It is very much in the folk genre, and it's really hard to actually get that jump factor of like a plucked string from a lot of headphone amps. A lot of them will just mush it out. Mjolnir has got the jump out of the chair thing, and I've been trying to, replicate that. Asgard's pretty good, pretty solid, maybe even more solid than Jotunheim on that. But yeah, that's one of those difficult to do things, and you're dealing with such low power. It shouldn't matter, but it does. And in fact, yeah, when I first heard Mjolnir 3, I'm like, oh crap, this thing sounds far too good, and I don't know why. So now I need to figure it out. But yeah, it's funny. One you go to Spangle, I go to the Midnight, which is a modern kind of a synthwave, band they've actually kind of moved off of synthwave now, but it's fairly well recorded. It's fun. It's interesting. And the essentially the lyrics are interesting to me. I like people who can write great lyrics, so that's why I gravitate to certain things.
Yeah, actually, the track "Bird on a Wire" is, of course, a Leonard Cohen tune. And talk about somebody who wrote great lyrics. I never appreciated his voice. He always sounded like the house musician has been drinking way too much and is on his 4th pack of Marlboros that night. And but his lyrics and melodies are amazing. So when somebody else comes along who can sing it nicely and do it beautifully, it can be lovely.
That's funny.
Another one who started out kind of janky and whose more recent work has been beautiful, and this is one of the other albums I use in my voicing, is North by Elvis Costello.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
yeah. That was kind of his big band album, and it's really fun. It's and beautifully recorded, and not at all Elvis Costello as we knew him when we were young and restless.
Right. Yeah. No, I get you. I'll have to dig that one up. It's really funny because one of the great things about streaming is you can go and try a lot of this out that you may have passed by. So the other thing is, there's more music than you can ever listen to in a lifetime. So
plus streaming's also fun if you have one of the things I like about Rune is when you're just on play things like this, thing that I've been listening to. It actually is pretty good about learning. If you hit fast forward and skip a track, first thing it asks you is, why do you do that? Are you not in the mood? Do you not like this? And it begins to learn what your tastes are. And so, a lot of the streaming services, if I use their native playlist generation, like if I put on something by David Bowie, I'm pretty, 95% chance Spotify's next track will be Prince.
Yeah. Or
And you start hearing like the same 15 or 20 songs all over again, and on and on and on. And Rune actually has managed to introduce me to a lot of fun music that I've actually come to really enjoy. It's been a great tool for discovering stuff.
Yeah, and that's one of the great things about today is, it wasn't always like that. You didn't always have access. You didn't have, things trying to help you to find other stuff you liked. It's,
you relied on the radio or the old guy at the record store.
Yeah. And now the radio is essentially, 24/7 commercials with light interludes of some music, rather than the other way around. So it's kind of difficult to discover stuff when, people are just talking all the time.
Yeah. Plus, and of course with the radios, you also always get, you're now listening to the sound of the North Bay noise.
Yes, and highly compressed to the limits of its life. It's like, if you have any dynamics in this, you will be very surprised.
Right. Plus or minus 3 dB by the time they're done with compression on everything.
Yeah, true. And brick walled at 15K, really, if you're talking the old style FM. Anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, we used to, when I ran a radio station in college, or was program manager for one, I was always, when I'd come on to do my show, I'd always turn the compressor off.
Yeah. Oh, that's.
The engineer would get all mad at me if I didn't put it back. He's like, yeah, you shouldn't be touching that. I'm like, it sounds better.
Oh man. No, that's.
Yeah. Well, guess what else would I say about voicing headphones? I think it's kind of interesting for us. Most people don't really know how it's done, and I can't speak to other manufacturers. But one of the things that's been kind of fun over the last 12 years or 13 years of doing this now is that I've kind of developed levers that manipulate different parts of the sonic spectrum, and so I have a bunch of tools that will work for 3 kilohertz and up. I have some other tools that will work from 500 to 1 kilohertz. I've got 200 to 500 hertz. I've got levers I can pull from below 200. And so, it's not quite like equalizing because there's only so much you can do with it, but you can kind of, play whack-a-mole and shift things around until you begin to get the voicing to come out the way you want and get the relative balance clean. And I think of all the things I've learned over the years, that I think our more recent products really highlight, is the most important thing we try to do is avoid radical discontinuities in the frequency response, anything other than something that's super high Q. And if it's super high Q, it probably should be a whole, not a peak. If we have, what I've noticed is that people are more tolerant of tonal variances than you think, and they adjust to them very easily. But when there's sudden discontinuities or a lot of this in the response, then that becomes an unpleasant experience to listen to. It begins to sound artificial, or it loses coherence, and the notion of kind of keeping the variations of within a rational number of dB between the the lows, the mids, and the highs. You can have variations on those themes that also not only play into people's listening preferences, but for us, how loud you're listening.
Yeah.
Like when I voice a headphone, am I listening at 75 dB or 85 dB for peaks or 95 dB? And, depending on how loud you listen, or, as during your voicing, it actually affects the curve you're generating. And so a lot of the time now we kind of optimize for between 85 and 95 dB peaks.
Mm-hmm.
Less than that, people are often listening as background music. And so I think that's a little less important, to get the voicing exactly right, because a lot of times that's what people do when they're working or reading, but when people are actually listening to music, not average power, but peak SPL between 85 and 95 will significantly change the response profile versus somebody who's trying to listen at 75, dB peaks. Because the lower amplitude levels, you definitely have to juice up your bass and your treble, because people's perception falls off as the volume drops.
It's the old Fletcher Munson curve.
Yep.
And that's why you saw in the old days, you'd walk into a room where someone had their sound system and they had an equalizer. You'd always see the smiley face, because first it's Fletcher Munson. Second, it's what a lot of people prefer. It was really funny. You could kind of see how close they were getting to audiophile, because it'd go from the smile to just a slight grin to then the equalizer would disappear. And it's like, oh, they're full audiophile now. No tone controls. So.
Yep.
And it's funny.
Which
There's
is great if your room is great. No controls works great if your room is perfect.
And everyone's room is perfect. Yeah.
Or not.
Yeah.
It was fun for me. I went in and I retuned all the stuff in my house using some DSP, and pulled out Rue and was measuring the in-room response. And I'm like, I was tolerating more variances here than I would accept in any of my headphones, regardless of price, and it sure sounded better and more consistent experience once a little bit of DSP was applied.
Yep. And it's funny. Absolutely. I have not engaged in that yet. We're still on the audiophile side of things, but we keep kind of looking at more advanced ways to change frequency response, and to improve room response, but haven't really done anything with it yet. Maybe someday.
Well, this doesn't really. Sorry, please.
Yeah, no, just maybe someday. It's something that it is funny. We're kind of lumped in over on the audiophile side when you're talking 2-channel, and what's funny is we're kind of lumped in over on the fun side with headphones a lot, because they're like, well, you do like EQs. So it's like, yeah, because EQs are useful, but you could do that in DSP. You could do that with a hardware EQ, or you could do nothing. You have a lot more controls than we do, so we create some. We create our EQs.
Yeah, well, and headphones, we have a room too. It's just very small.
I know.
And the space defined around your ear by the cup is your room. And so one of the things that we have to deal with, if you want to think of it this way, in voicing headphones, is how to handle the room acoustics of that ear pad. Every geometry changes the standing waves. The volume changes the standing waves. The volume changes the load on the driver depending on the impedance of the source. You may have the same issues that you have with headphone or with amplifiers, where, if you have higher output impedance, you're a little more sensitive to the load. And so, all these things combine to have an effect on the sonic experience. And, of all the things that I've concluded over the years about how people listen, is that the first order issue is tone. If somebody doesn't like the tone of what you're doing, nothing else matters. Who cares if you have 0.008 distortion or 0.1 distortion if you don't like the tonal balance? And so, that's the 800-pound gorilla. And the neat thing is, for our higher end headphones, we actually found a solution to fixing the room acoustics. It's right. Like the AMTF technology actually takes the room out of the equation. And it does create a kind of different experience for it. But the trick is to be able to do that, with entry level products and keep it affordable and keep the engineering to a rational level is more difficult. But even for things like the Aeon RT, we actually found some materials and choice of damping materials within the design of the product that do minimize or reduce those standing waves, and end up giving it a nice, pleasing top end, so that, even though it's a $500 headphone, when you listen to cymbals, instead of going tss, they give you that kind of tang sound that
Yeah.
a cymbal should actually have. And it's really hard to do that, especially when you're trying to keep the price and the cost low, especially when you're still manufacturing in the U.S.
Yeah, that we know that feeling all too well, and it is funny because we've had similar challenges on Asgard. Asgard is a true old school, no excuses, internal power transformer, linear power supply, fully discrete power supply, modular, with really high quality, stuff throughout. About the only concessions we have are, it doesn't have our hidden fasteners chassis, which costs more. And it's feature limited, of course. It takes one card. It has only two gain levels. You can switch between the card and one input, but it's a really good amp. I mean, it's one of those things that you'd probably be happy to have for years and years. And to be able to do that, put a 5-year warranty on it, sell it for $279 without a card, $379 with a card, with a 9028 DAC card. That's tough, especially here, like you said.
Yeah, and then and the fact that it has so much power, is it's like the perfect. Honestly, as a pairing for something like the Aeon RT, you couldn't ask for a better price point and quantity of power and clean power. With a clean DAC on it, it really is good. A lot of the lower cost DAC amps that we have seen, there have been some that measure really well, and then when it comes down to actually putting out current and enough to drive something like the RT to a satisfying level, it's just not there. There's just been a lot of stuff that's been disappointing where you look at it on paper and you're like, well, it looks like it's got all the power we need, and then it just doesn't.
Yeah, and it's funny. We need to start measuring our stuff even at lower impedances, because I suspect that this puts out about almost exactly the same power as, everyone's focused on Midgard now, because they're like, well, that's 4.8 watts and Asgard is only 3.5. I'm like, well, Asgard has a transformer that's 3 times the size of Midgard. So into 12 ohms, they're probably about equivalent. They're probably going to both top out at about 6 watts. But Asgard has quite a bit more reserves. So what does that translate to? To me, Asgard's a bit more dynamic and open than Midgard. But a lot of people are going for Midgard because it's got some new stuff in it. But I don't know, Asgard. Again, you don't have to deal with wall wart. Plug it right in the wall, hook it up to your source, plug in your Aeons, and you're set.
And if 3 watts or 3.5 watts isn't enough for you, you're probably already so deaf that you're not really a viable customer, for your next purchase.
It's a lot of power. 3.5 watts into headphones is an insane amount of power. So
yep, you've got headroom.
Yeah, we've actually started, kind of translating some of our specs into like specs that matter, and one of them is like, power enough to drive all the headphones, noise inaudible on everything, including IEMs. It's just because a lot of people, that's what they want to, they want to know. It's like, will I plug it in? Will it drive my headphone? Will I hear, hiss and noise and stuff? And if it's like yes and no, everything else is going to be like, do you like it? And that's where our job is.
We get the effect of that in specifications. Like, we don't publish frequency response specifications. When I do specifications, I say frequency response. Yes.
I was really tempted when we introduced Mjolnir 3 to put specifications adequate, and that was it. And I'm like, no, then we're going to get torn apart. So we did actually provide less measurements than we usually do, but a decent amount of measurements for that.
The irony for us is that with headphones, frequency response is probably the most abused specification in the history of the universe, besides THD as the reason you would decide to buy something. Because what'll happen is you'll put it's the vast majority of headphones on the market have these specifications like 1 hertz to 80 kilohertz, and it's like, how are you measuring that? It's like, it's certainly, you're certainly not measuring that on like a 7-Eleven coupler. So is that just what are you saying that I was able to generate a curve like this and plus or minus 60 dB? That's my frequency range, or frequency response. Because they never put on like plus or minus 3 dB points on headphone specs. They just say, frequency response of 10 to 80 kilohertz. And the HD audio thing really exacerbated that. I was contacted about, are you going to label your headphones with HD audio? And I'm like, tell me what that entails. And they're like, well, you have to have frequency response to 40 kilohertz. I'm like, how are you measuring that? And it's like, I got that far in the conversation. I was like, not interested in, going, through this hocus pocus to get an icon we can put on a box that truly, just as far as I'm concerned, means nothing, because there's, not a meaningful way to actually assess that, other than just saying I can do a near field measurement of my driver on with a microphone in the near field in an infinite baffle. I can see 40 kilohertz, therefore I meet your spec.
Yeah, that's actually pretty hilarious too. And it's actually one of the reasons we stopped doing double measurements. We used to actually specify 20 to 20K plus or minus 0.1 or whatever, and then 1 hertz to 700 kilohertz minus 3. And people were confused by that. And I'm like, yeah, it goes way, way out there, but within the audio band, it's this. So pretty much now we just say 20 to 20K plus or minus 0.01 dB is typical for our stuff. And it's like, yeah, and then it rolls off way, way, way past the audio band. So far, past that, it has to have input filters, or else it might actually amplify AM radio. That's yeah.
or your phone, like the good old days of the Blackberries.
Oh. Yep. And thankfully, we're kind of past that. But boy, yeah, I remember those days.
Right.
Yeah. Now up in the 5 gigahertz realm, it's not so bad. But there used to be an FAQ we had. It's like, move your phone away from your amp. Take it off the top of your amplifier. Yeah, that's what can you do?
At least your phones don't erase your credit cards anymore either.
No, they don't. And honestly, it's fun. But it all does come back to like essentially the entry level. A lot of people don't know, what to expect. And if we can deliver to them on our side an amp that they're going to be happy with, for as long as they want, and on your side something that's comfortable, sounds good, doesn't weigh a ton. It's like, there you go. Good experience. They can decide then, do I like it? Is this for me? Or, do I go back to, AirPods? Or do I go completely crazy and start buying, Stealths and Ragnaroks and stuff like that? Because there's the other side of it, right?
Yep. Well, and for me, of course, given what I do, for me, the majority of my time is with the higher end headphones. That's just, when you have access to all of it, it's like being in a candy store. Why am I going to, eat the really crappy chocolate-like substance when I can get some really nice chocolate? But the cool I shouldn't say that actually, because it's not even fair. That does a disservice. Like the RT Closed is a fabulous headphone. And it actually is a ton of fun. And if we made nothing else, I would totally enjoy listening to that headphone. It has such a pleasant, clean mid-range, really punchy bass, and enough sparkle on the top without being bright, that it's a fun listen to everything. And as you said, the Asgard's a little bit on the just got a touch of warmth to it, and the DAC in it is nice and clean and doesn't have any edginess to it, and so it's just a nice, relaxed pairing. It's like I have given that headphone as a gift a number of times.
Yeah.
And the Asgard is one of my favorite recommended amps to go with it because it's just got so much power, and it's so clean and easy, and it's affordable. So the price point's really well aligned to the headphones price.
Yeah, and what's hilarious is what you'll find is I found this on Lisa's, my wife's pile of stuff. This is the headphone she uses. Same thing in California. Every time we get a set on, she kind of pinches it and they disappear. So I don't get to hear them quite as much, as I'd like. But
I guess we should
there's
send you a
something.
set.
There's something. Yeah.
Well, I think that's probably all I
I
have
think
to
we
say
may
on
have
this.
covered it. Hmm?
Any other thoughts you have about voicing or the subject at hand?
Well, like I said, you guys have a lot to play with. We have a very, small number of levers, and we're still trying to figure out what the correlations are on the smaller stuff that we're doing. We're getting there. We're getting there because lower feedback definitely does have a sound, things like that. But it's not necessarily always better. So there's a balance there somewhere.
Yeah, it's been fun
And
flipping around on the Mjolnir a bit to go back and forth with feedback or not, and to go balanced and not. And so you have 4 different ways the amp operates, and each one has a slightly different vibe.
yeah, and it's one of those things that it in itself lets you experiment a bit, and then now I'm like, okay, well, there's some unexpected stuff. Let's see if we can replicate it. Hopefully we can. But until then, we got Asgard and we got lots of other, cool stuff. And I think that's basically it.
Yeah, and it's really fun. I hope that we can, I hope that people enjoy this bundle and that it serves as a great way for people to either, give gifts to family members or
Mhm.
partners for as a way to get it, them introduced to headphones, or to give access to people who are really looking to step up from their, you know, IEMs or their, name your $99 headphone, and move
Yeah.
up into beginning to have a real audiophile experience and being able to do it for what, 679, and
Yeah.
to be able to get some really well engineered products that are actually made in the US, and have a track record, and they're stable and reliable, and quality and lovely to listen to. And it's like, I think that's I think that's a real winner, so I hope people really enjoy this package.
Yeah, I think they will. The early, essentially the people we've mentioned it to, in the group, they're like pretty excited about it actually. So, um, I think we see how it goes, but I suspect that people are going to like it a lot.
Well, thank you guys.
Cool. Yeah. No. Thank you. It's always fun to do something with you guys because we are so aligned in so many ways, and guys, don't we're not going to like merge or anything. It's just we both do cool stuff. So there you go.
Yeah, it'd be if we yeah, if we ever merged, you'd come in and see the wild and wonderful world of manufacturing analog transducers.
Oh yeah, no, it's like I'm sure that I would probably run screaming just like the turntable. Yeah.
Yeah, it's got its moments. But at the end of the day, when you get that one and you go through all that pain and you start shipping the product and they're all coming out the way they're supposed to, and people react to it, and you're like, oh, all that hard work really pays off. And it is still the best thing about my job, that at the end of the day, I know that every box that goes out the door is going to make somebody's day nicer. And
Mhm.
it's like, how can you ask for something better to spend your time on than that?
Yeah, same here. And the fact that we get to play with, weird audio stuff. I mean, I want to keep doing this until people don't tolerate it anymore, essentially.
All right. Well, thank you, gents.
Cool.
Appreciate the time and look forward to seeing how this goes, and wishing you and your family a happy Thanksgiving and a
Yep.
merry, happy holiday thing.
Yep. Whatever holidays you do, But yeah, definitely happy Thanksgiving.